Welcome to Will's Personal Development Podcast, where we bring you data and science-backed answers and advice from billionaires.
Welcome to Will's Personal Development Show. My name is Will Chow, and I'm coming to you live from my home, but also from my website, willyoulaugh.com. Today, we are going to be covering a fairly common asked question. This time we have Ali who has written in with this question. She says, I can't get organized enough to be truly effective in my job. In addition, I want to transfer my skills to a higher paying industry and can't get motivated or something to make this happen. Lastly, I can't decide if I need to or should go back to school for my master's. I'm very stuck and underachieving. So what's common about this question is the organization part. People have written in about how they are messy, they're not organized enough, and they think this affects their productivity. Or they think that productivity is a bigger issue in general that needs to be dealt with in some way. Now, let's just get to organizing and becoming better organized first. Now, I always prefer referencing experts and credible people, so I want to start off with Ray Dalio, a billionaire, as well as Marie Kondo. She is a organization consultant. I can't even believe there's a job for that. That's just a fancy way of explaining her job title. She really simply goes into people's houses who are very messy, and these people will pay her to organize their home. She's actually very successful. Her book, The Stress-Free Art of Tidying Up, has sold millions of copies, so she is really rich. And she is also highly in demand. People will wait months to have her personally help out. I read her book. I read the manga version of her book. She wrote a nice, cool, cartoony manga version for people who don't like reading. And I think her method is exceptionally effective. It's not perfect. Obviously, it may not work for some people, but it's really effective. Now, you don't necessarily need to read the whole book to understand what her method is. I'm going to summarize it for you. So in terms of tidying up, she says you kind of want to start in a order of what you are willing to get rid of first, and then move to the most sentimental items at the end. So you start with one category of items and you keep tidying based off those. So rather than tidy by room, you tidy by item. So in the case of your work, you probably only have one cubicle room, so it's not as big of a deal, but you want to start with one set of items. Maybe it's miscellaneous items that you could care less if you threw away, like paper clips or staples or pens or pencils or napkins, and then you move on to the next thing. Maybe that's whatever other items, tech items. And then ultimately you want to move to the last two categories at the end because they're the ones that you're most sentimental with and it's harder to throw away. So these could be your pictures with family, or your drawings, or maybe someone, a loved coworker of yours gave you a gift and you don't even really like the gift, but it's sentimental because you like your coworker. So you kind of want to work through these, and it's essentially about throwing it away, throwing a lot of this stuff away. And her criteria for whether you throw it away or not is, does it spark joy? Or does it just give you a meh reaction? You're indifferent to it. Now, believe it or not, most items are natural. Like, you immediately know in your gut if it sparks joy or it's just like meh. You could care less if it's thrown away or not. So in this way, you can essentially eliminate a lot of items. When I apply this criteria to my own life and my clothing, I have been able to part ways with a lot of clothing that I thought I needed, I thought I wanted, But really, when I asked, does it spark joy? It does not. It was just something that I had because it was free and I wanted to save money. But when it's something that's just there and you barely wear it and it's kind of good but not great, it's somewhat stylish but not that stylish, fits kind of well but not perfectly, those are those categories that just put you down that level of quality that you want, which means you don't use it as much as you want, and even when you do, you don't feel special. That's an indication that you want to throw it away. So not just with clothing, but items in your room, your office, that's usually what happens. And documents and papers are like second to last too. Those are a bit more, not always sentimental, but more important. So it's harder to throw away. And so again, it's about vitality. Is this vital? Do you need it? Can you turn it into electronic form? So ultimately, what we really end up finding is that we don't need a lot of stuff. This goes into the whole movement of minimalism. There's blogs out there like minimalist.org with millions of followers who follow this minimalist approach. That doesn't say you have to become a minimalist and live on one pair of clothing a day. That's an extreme level of minimalism. What I mean by minimalism in a way that's productive and effective to you is that with less stuff, you're just naturally more organized. Since you have less stuff to clutter your office or your room, there's less things to make it look disorganized. If you just have a desk and a computer there and maybe one or two decorations, maybe it's like a sports picture on the wall or some flowers to decorate the place, just so you don't look too robotic and without a soul at your office, that's still so easy to organize. It cuts down on the time it takes to clean your room each time it gets messy because you just have to adjust one or two things because that's all you have there. So can you kind of start seeing the beauty of minimalism? Plus you have less to worry about because there's less for you to forget. You have your picture frame, your computer, and your desk. Half of it's not going away or getting lost. So that's kind of how it works. Now, over time, obviously, things creep up. It happens to me too. You get papers from coworkers, bosses, and that's when it's time to use Marie Kondo's formula and start throwing it away, tossing it. For documents, I use the free Evernote app and I take an electronic picture of it. It saves it to my Evernote and then I throw away the original. I get that people want to hand me these handouts because they think a physical copy will drill it into my brain better. But for me, that's not the case. Essentially it's still reading either way. And inevitably I get so many paper documents that it just becomes this big stack on my desk that does no good. So I will throw it away. I'll have an electronic copy. And whenever I need it, I can search it up and I'll read it on there to get their cheat sheet or reference points or whatever else is needed. This dramatically reduces the pile of paper on my desk, which obviously doesn't look attractive and isn't as cool. Plus, with a digital copy, you can take it anywhere and view it on your phone, your computer, and it doesn't take up as much space. There is definitely still a urge, even from young people, to hand out physical versions. And I partially get it. A physical version, you have it in your hand, you can reference it more, you can feel it. For some people, it reminds you of what is necessary. So if that's for you, that's for you. Just find ways of cutting it down and throw out the papers that you aren't necessarily using. We all know that there's papers and other stuff that you think is useful, but you never use. That's a sign that you will never use it in the future, that you've never used it. And if you've never used it in the past, even though you said you would, stop playing on that hope. We have this for many different areas of our life. For many people, it's bookmarks. We'll bookmark 100 different articles and we've never read them. I went on a huge bookmark cleanse on my internet browser for the last 4 years, because I found that a lot of people who never succeed in life and just plateau or stay in mediocrity, what they'll do is they'll feed off this fake hope that one day they'll read all these articles on their bookmarks, or all these notes they have on their Evernote that they'll never read, or that they've taken down, or these articles or lists that they've saved on the top 20 or 100 books that they should read. But when you look back on the last 4 or 5 or 2 years of their life, they haven't even referenced any of these once. So I started to build this list myself of bookmarks, and I just went on this massive cleanse. I just deleted them all. Most of them were outdated. Some of the stuff was on like investing and stocks and poker and stuff that I've lost interest in, and then stuff that had just become outdated, like the search engine optimization guide of 2014. Well, search engine optimization moves very fast. Most of those tips don't work anymore. And then there's stuff that I didn't even think was useful. I thought it was useful, but I knew in my heart I wasn't going to read them now. So it was just a hassle, and it was intimidating and overwhelming to have this massive bookmark list. So that's why, when it comes to documents, any type of information, what's best is what Pat Flynn, a successful entrepreneur, and many others call the next in line formula. There's different names for it, but essentially you're only absorbing knowledge on your very next step. So essentially, you don't have, let's say you want to become a entrepreneur. If that's the case and you're just starting out and you're just getting funding, you just learn what's next in line. You only have documents for what's next. So that's something like getting funding, validating a business idea. Those are things that you can learn. You shouldn't have bookmarks or documents for stuff that's years down the line, like how to manage a 500-person company, or how to communicate with a direct hire who has their own people to manage. That's something that probably won't happen until you have a larger company with 50 plus people where you have that hierarchy. So most people waste time learning too much about something that they'll potentially face in the distant future, or just piling a bunch of crap and remaining in that comfort of hope because they would rather be comfortable in that delusion of, oh, one day I'll be here, or one day I'll have this, or having this list is productive, than actually doing the work and taking the next step that will improve them. So essentially, that's how I recommend organizing your office. Usually, if it's that cluttered that you're so frustrated with working and doing your job effectively, then that means you have a massive amount of stuff that's usually just causing you more headache than benefiting you at all. And it really requires parting with it in some way. Obviously, that could mean throwing away a lot of it. And that's hard for people, but you have to do it. Other than that, there's like a middle ground. I've worked out a middle ground myself where I've shipped a bunch of stuff to a storage room in my parents' house, or just, my old closet in my parents' house, and it's distant. It's still somewhat accessible, but it's not there. It's not in your room. It's not in your place, so you're not cluttered by it. I think usually with a lot of clutter and stuff that you think you should have, it usually becomes free. It's usually because it's free. You're giving it for free, but you never use it. And that's a huge, huge danger. Free is such a dangerous concept and dangerous position. And poor people are exceptionally susceptible to it. I'm a clear case. So, of course, my parents did not grow up rich, And so we had to kind of hustle, and we would always freak out when there's free stuff, like free water bottles or free juice shakers or free blenders. And the problem is that most of the stuff is mediocre, and that free mindset really affects you in the long run. Think about it. If you're eating free fast food or free sandwiches or free waffles or donuts because some business is trying to promote themselves, which is usually why you're getting free stuff, you're damaging how your body behaves. It's taking in garbage food, affecting your longevity, how long you live, affecting your focus, your concentration, your energy. And just because it's free and because you have low money, you're reducing your cognitive function. So think about that. And it, same thing goes with items in your office. Maybe there's free water bottles or blender bottles or free handouts or papers or trinkets you've gotten over the years. Do you really need that stuff, or is it just there because you want something free? So that's really important. I think it just naturally becomes a clutter of stuff that's worth throwing out rather than having. I've found this to happen numerous times. There's been a ton of napkins and stuff that I've gotten that I was like, it's nice to have, but I don't need to have it. So even though I've had a bunch of napkins, soon it's become a mess. It's like, that's more napkins than I need. It's making my office look more cluttered and ineffective. I'm going to throw it away. So I did. So in terms of organization, it's essentially about decluttering, but essentially even more than that. Like, you don't even have to clean every single thing there. I think Marie Kondo suggests you do. She thinks a entire cleanse is necessary to feel perfectly effective and thinking at your highest level and most productive. But I think there's potentially a good middle ground if you're not psychologically prepared to do thorough cleans and part ways with most or all of the things in your office. And so a good middle ground is really to find those cornerstone pieces of obstacles that are preventing your productivity. Is it some specific, like maybe your whole office is a complete mess. It's like a garbage dump there and you can't see anything. Well, what essentially, start with what are the cornerstone items that are really causing you to fail to do your job effectively? Is it because you have no space on your desk to write stuff with? Well, don't just clean it once and come back to it, because eventually you're going to recede back to your disorganized level it once was, and it's a makeshift solution. You're going to have a desk that's clean for one day, and then a couple months later it's going to be back to its messy state. So you want to set up systems to fix those common, most major roadblocks. One would be, well, you just keep asking yourself why? Why does my desk get disorganized? Well, it's because I put all these papers on. Well, why do you put all these papers on? Well, it's because I get all these papers from my boss, even though I don't want them. Well, why does your boss give you those papers? Well, he's someone who's very anxious and wants to make sure I'm organized. Usually, you get to the root cause once it's an adjective rather than a fact. I learned that from Ray Dalio. And the root cause is usually, well, it's a person. It's you or someone else and some emotion or adjective, some descriptor of that person. Anxiety or fear. So if that's the case, well, find out a system to kind of, work something else out. And in that example I gave, there's multiple breakpoints where you can consistently and sustainably break that pattern so that it doesn't happen again. Well, maybe it's, you want to start at the root cause if you can. Talk with your boss. See if this is something that you can work together with him so that his or her anxiety is tamed without it culminating in him giving you papers. Maybe it's the same thing digitally, or you develop some level of trust or proof or evidence that you can meet that boss's expectations without them having to resort to sending you a bunch of papers. Or you do get those papers, but you tell your boss, hey, I prefer a paperless thing. I promise you have to establish that there's trust there. I promise you I'll get the things done. You don't have to worry. Even though it is paperless, I do reference these. In fact, I reference these even more than I do with the paper ones. So I think we can work something out where you don't send me these paper versions, or so on and so forth. Or it's worst case situation, you work something out lower funnel or lower down the chain. Let's say you get the papers, your boss will not budge on that. Again, you have to figure out, you have to be courageous enough to try. And sometimes it's your own anxiety stopping you. Well, why don't you talk to your boss about it? Well, it's because you're scared of confrontation. Well, that's something you have to work on and overcome. But let's say you're not scared of confrontation and it's just your boss won't budge on these papers. Well, maybe you can put these somewhere else, or maybe you can ship them off to a closet or somewhere else in your room so that when your boss comes in, you can report and pull out these papers. Maybe it's a file cabinet instead. And that way, they're not a hassle for you, but when your boss comes knocking on your door, you have them as proof that you didn't throw them away. So there's multiple different ways if you take this and assess it strategically by asking why, finding the major cornerstone parts that are impacting your system, and creating a better system so that sustainably and constantly this doesn't happen in the future. And you keep identifying things. Maybe one thing is your desk that's cluttering you. Maybe another is you have so many different projects and demands that you don't know how to multitask and meet everyone's priorities and demands of you. Well, that's not always something that's physical. It's not always a physical manifestation of your problems. Sometimes it is, but sometimes it's mental, and how you strategically identify the issue and deal with it emotionally. So let's say it's more of a mental dilemma with too many employees asking you for stuff. Well, that's an order of prioritization. Now, a lot of people have haphazard or random ways of prioritizing just based off, their own opinions or beliefs. Instead, you kind of want to take it to a higher level and figure out, well, how can you see what truly matters most? So usually this comes down to two things. What are your bigger level goals, and what are your company or organization's higher level goals? What does your boss care about most, and what does your boss's boss care about most? Now these are usually fairly well defined. If not, you ask your boss. You clearly ask your boss, you find out, well, what are you measured on? Because your boss or your boss's boss, that's what's they're measured on specific goals, specific numbers usually, for them to keep their job or get promoted or get a raise. And so when you have those, when you help them, you help yourself, you're seen as a star and so forth. And therefore, when you have that filter, you can assess all those other priorities and figure out what's most important. Maybe someone wants you to do I'm just giving examples here, social media campaigns. And another person wants you to do something that will directly impact the bottom line and increase the return on investment that your company makes. Well, in that situation, you know that because you've talked to your boss, you know that return on investment for the company's bottom line is the most important thing. Then you know to prioritize return on investment, which is usually the case for most organizations. They care about profitability most. That's not always the case, though, with certain nonprofits or certain companies. Maybe they care more about sustainability or brand awareness or impacting the world and fulfilling people's lives by making, saving lives or whatever. If that's a priority, then you can ask yourself, well, of these three tasks I have today, a random social gathering or another human resource task where you're just kind of organizing training documents, or this third task, which directly impacts the bottom line because it's going to bring more customers down and into being aware of your brand and making sales because you're running this new Facebook ad, and focusing on that first and making sure it's done well is clearly your best priority. And whatever's the highest priority, you do that first. You do what's most important first, and by doing that, you can sleep happy, because at the end of the day, when you have a lack of time, which sometimes you will, what gets missed are the things that can be missed anyways. Unfortunately, people don't prioritize at all, and they just kind of take tasks based on whatever is handed to them in the moment. So if they're interrupted and someone gives them some other request, like, hey, there's a typo on your website, they just naturally feel the need to finish it immediately. Well, is that actually the most useful? And then there's other stuff that you're procrastinating on that you're not doing as well. So there's that. I want to reference Ray Dalio. He has a book called Principles. He's a billionaire, and he has a whole section, a small section on productivity, and he crystallizes and defines productivity in a very simple way. So, in terms of productivity, and you can apply this to staying organized and clean as well, productivity gets broken down into simple, effective ways that we can all improve ourselves. Now, he says that in terms of productivity, there's only a few things that you can do to improve it. It's so simple. He says there's only 3 ways to get more done other than working harder. So that's the 4th way. Technically, you can outwork your competition. So other than working harder, there's 3 ways to get more done. One is what I just mentioned, prioritize and do less. The second is delegate to the right people. So if you have people under you or people on the same level as you, don't be afraid to ask for help. Sometimes these people have time. They're willing to help you, but it's just your fear or unawareness of asking for help that's holding you back. And, when you hire the right people who are better and smarter than you and more capable than you, that's the best people to hire, because you can trust them and they'll get the job done effectively and, faster than you and better than you, which will help you do more. A lot of people get jealous or nervous and fearful when people are better than them, and that's not the right way of looking at things. That's an opportunity for you to learn, to grow, to learn from them, and ask for their help so they help you, which will impact your efforts. It's about management. It's about emotional intelligence, and not thinking in a scarcity mindset or scarcity worldview where, if someone eats from your cake, there's less cake from you. It's not like that. It's the more you help others, the more you help yourself. The more others succeed, the more you succeed. Finally, the 3rd way to get productive is to improve productivity with creativity, character, and wisdom. So the 3rd way is about innovation. He says if you're creative, you can find new ways of doing tasks. If you have character, you can wrestle with challenges and demands. And if you have wisdom, you can look at things from a higher level and decide what's most important. So I've kind of touched on wisdom. It's about prioritization. With character, you have to stand your ground and wrestle with the challenges and demands that people ask of you, and, really push back and sometimes say, hey, I have other priorities right now. I have to politely refuse getting this to you at this time. That's just how it's going to work in this organization because we have limited time, and you have to trust that they won't be offended. And even if they do get offended, that's okay. You can't please everyone, and that's the nature of the game. With creativity, that requires imagination. That requires eating healthy foods, having enough sleep, and innovating your mind so that you can put together new concepts in interesting ways. So, that's that with productivity. Ray Dalio also says that when it comes to productivity, projects usually take 1.5 times as long and as expensive as predicted. So it's not just something that will just happen automatically, and you have to put that into your plans. Usually things naturally take longer and cost more than you expect. So when you plan those out and put those in your calendar and plan those out and expect for that, you can really account for things and predict and plan for them more effectively, which leads to less surprises and less problems. Finally, Ray has to say that you should build downtime into your schedule. If all you're doing is task upon task and you have no breaks, you will burn out to a halt. So when it comes to being organized as well, build in time to not only relax, but time to organize your office. It could be before work, after work, your lunch break, or even during work if your boss will allow it. So build in this time. There's the very famous productivity method called the Pomodoro technique, which is roughly 25 minutes of work and then 5 minutes of break. And the break has to be something where you're looking at nature, you're relaxing, you can't be on your phone, you can't be surfing the web. It has to be a legitimate break where you're taking a walk and moving and seeing nature. So that's one way of taking those breaks so you don't burn out. And it's, you also want to schedule in maybe 15-minute sessions or 30-minute sessions where you clean and you throw away stuff in your office. For me, I definitely have struggled with the same thing at my home, at my office as well. And it's usually documents, it's usually free gimmicky stuff that people hand out to market their company. And I can't just help but, have it. So I have journals and water bottles and blender bottles and papers and business cards and hand sanitizer, a bunch of random stuff, even books that I barely reference, just sitting there taking up space, even a phone that I barely use. So it's one of those things where you kind of have to assess for yourself. Is this necessary? How often do I use this? And unless it's like really often and it brings you joy and sparks you joy, chances are you have the capability and the need to throw it out, or at least put it in storage. Put it somewhere else where it's not in your main hub. There's a main hub, the main area where you get most of your work done, usually at your desk. And that's your prime real estate. That's your golden area. And you want to make sure that it's uncluttered, that what is there is only the stuff that's necessary. No stuff that's just kind of taking up space and removing your effectiveness. And when you have that and all you see there is stuff that you use on a daily basis or a weekly basis constantly, and you see the value in, you're just going to feel so much more organized. It's not going to be a distraction, and you can just start your day fresh and ready to go. You know what you're going to do, and that's how you succeed. I mean, take any athlete performing at the highest of levels. They've organized their day and their workspace so that everything is seamless. They don't have many obligations. Take a swimmer like Michael Phelps. All he has to do is wake up and swim. Everything is, organized for him so that all the other distractions and tasks and obligations are moved away. And when you have a cluttered desk with random stuff on it that's going to distract you or slow you down, that's not going to work. So in terms of Ali's other question on transferring your skills to a higher paying industry, getting motivated, and going back to school for a master's, that's something that I've covered before in other content. So again, when you're asking your questions, make sure I haven't answered them already on my site or my YouTube channel. Usually I have. It's just you have to do a little searching. If you go on Google and just search your topic, like motivation or school, and then willyoulaugh.com, you'll usually find something that I've written or made a video about or podcast about already. In the case of transferring your job to a higher paid industry, most skills are transferable. Some aren't, some technical skills aren't, but usually soft skills are, and experience is, management is. And if not, you can always learn something new. Most people start off out of the womb knowing nothing. The biggest fear is that, it's too late for me. I'll have to spend decades developing that skill and starting over in this new industry, and I'll be behind the crowd, and therefore I can't start. This time I have to reference Ramit Sethi, a top career specialist and personal development blogger. He has millions of readers every month on his blog, IWillTeachYouToBeRich.com. And I took his dream job course, which was extremely pricey. It cost thousands of dollars. And his main concept behind his blog and the course is that you reach out in a friendly manner to people who are seasoned in that industry, and you pick their brain and you ask. Don't ask your friend or your family member. Ask someone who's actually in that industry. And if you are courteous and you're respectful of their time, you only ask for 5 or 10 minutes, and you tell them who you are and you're honest, and you say, I have that hustle. I just want 5 or 10 minutes of your time to get on the phone, grab coffee. I'll pay for coffee to learn more about your industry. Eventually someone will say yes. So reach out to enough people on LinkedIn, 20, 30, 50, and someone will say yes. And I've done this myself, and it has happened. Sometimes it took a long time, but it did. And they'll tell you, because different industries are different. The market will tell you. Some industries you will be happily surprised. People will say, you don't need 10 years. In fact, you don't even need to go to school to get this job. So figure out what industry or job title you want, and then pick those people's brains, and they will say, you know what, I've been in this job for 12 years, and you don't need to go to graduate school. In fact, graduate school is expensive and unnecessary. All you need is this certification, which you can get online here, and then you can intern here, and in 2 years you have the job. And they usually have those insider tips that will help you get that job faster and quicker, because they've made the mistakes themselves and they've seen the ins and outs of the industry. They may be like, you don't want to go this route where you have to apply for a job on their website because that's a black hole. There's too many applications. If you go around the back and you network with these people at this networking event, you're going to find, you're going to get in much easier. So when you ask those questions to get those answers, you're going to be off to a great start. Now, that's not always the case for certain industries. You will get the cold hard truth back. Some people, and again, you want to ask multiple people. Some people have different opinions or insider tips. They may give different advice. They may be like, I'm sorry, but if you want to be a doctor or a lawyer, because I am a doctor or lawyer, you have to go to med school. You have to do this for X years. It's going to take 9 years of your life. And you know what? It sucks that you are behind the curve in the fact that most doctors will be certified and ready in the workforce by the time they're in their mid-30s. And since you started late, it'll take you a lot longer. But, if that is the case, you still have a chance. So it takes you until you're 45 to become a doctor. Well, you're still 45. You still have until 90 years of age before you die. So, there's pros and cons, there's trade-offs and sacrifices, and the news isn't always good. But if you have a positive mindset and you look for the positive sides to every situation, every failure or a disadvantage or obstacle usually has its hidden opportunities there if you look for it. So, essentially that's about it. In terms of motivation and underachievement, which is what's the final thing that Ali has asked about, that simply comes down to finding your passion. If you have joy in something, as Stephen King says, if you find something that gives you joy, you will never stop doing it. And it's not always easy to find something that you love that pays a good amount of money. and you have to fight for it. You have to work for it, and it may take years or decades of passion, persistence, creativity before you finally find a way of making a good amount of money from that passion. But in your heart, you already know what you're passionate about to a certain extent. Sometimes you just haven't stumbled across it yet, so that requires testing and trying out new things. But some things you've already stumbled across even in your childhood that you really enjoy doing. Maybe it's travel, maybe it's dancing, maybe it's art, or maybe it's something you've never tried before, like rock climbing or salsa dancing or stencil painting or something weird like grasshopper collecting. And until you stumble across that and you test it out and try it, you don't know it's your passion because you haven't tried it out a few times yet. So I've written a whole article on this, a very comprehensive article and mini articles on this. If you go to willyoulaugh.com/find-your-passion, it'll take you to my article that goes into depth about the different angles of passion. But, when you love something, you don't need to find a motivation to do it. No one complains about finding the motivation to play more video games because they love it. There is a middle ground there between, passion and motivation, and, at least temporarily tolerating something you don't particularly enjoy to pay the bills and put food on your table. And that's been the way for centuries. But now, thanks to technology, we have more opportunity than ever to find a passion. And it's not easy, and it's not guaranteed. You're not entitled to it. It is a luxury, a privilege that you have to fight for, you have to work for, and that may take years and years to finally sculpt out. So, again, it doesn't happen overnight. It should not be delivered to your lap on a silver platter. But that's something you kind of want to keep an eye out for and work towards. And in the meantime, there's, hacking your health, your fitness, your nutrition, and your sleep, which will give you more energy to stay motivated, even if you don't like something that you're doing right now. And, you do whatever you can for the moment to tolerate what's not your passion. You can find ways of making things that aren't fun at least partially fun. You can put little games into it. People do this in a restaurant business all the time. I used to work in food and dining, and they would have serving games. They would have little serving games to teach us how to serve better. Where you have to do certain things. So I worked in fine dining where you had to serve the plate on the left side and then the water on the right side of the person. You have to ask things in a certain order and so forth. And we did a whole relay race game where each person had to carry food very quickly, and it was a race, and we had different teams, and we had to serve it on the right side, or if we served it on the improper side, we had to do it over again. And it was a bit of a game that was put into a moderately mundane task of serving people food. So different people like different things, and you'll be surprised where it leads you. I've met people who love cleaning. It's something I dislike doing. I was shocked when I found out. Certain people like cleaning, sweeping, and wiping tables. And then I found other people who really like stuff I hate, like organizing papers or stapling stuff, or working out, or some of the craziest stuff, labor-intensive physical labor, or just mundane, repetitive, mediocre, mind-numbing tasks. Some people love that stuff. So it really just depends on the person, and I think you'll find more than ever that people will fit in the different places. So do what you can as of now. I get the sense, Ali, that you have stuff that you're not too motivated about now that you're tolerating. Maybe you're even going to school because you don't necessarily like it. So the last thing I have for you is a YouTube video. On my YouTube channel, which you can get to at youtube.com/willyoulaugh, there's a search function there. Type in college, and it will search for all videos I have with the word college in them. And there's one video I recently did called "Should You Go to College?" And that also covers graduate school and post-secondary education. And it goes really into depth. It covers all these different angles from Gary Vaynerchuk to more conservative views on this. And ultimately, it's about, well, what do you actually want to accomplish? Do you need school to get there? Usually, unless it's like a really specialized job like physical therapist or doctor or lawyer, nowadays you don't need to go to school to get that. And there's a lot of job titles that supposedly on the job application says master's degree, but once you actually pick people's brains on LinkedIn who work in that industry or have that job title, some of these jobs don't actually need a graduate school or master's degree. So a lot of the times these schools are businesses. They're there to make money, and they'll sell you on this idea that you need that degree, and they'll pull on your heartstrings, or they'll play on your fear of, lack of that degree or that imposter syndrome to get you to spend that money so they make money. But it's usually not necessary. Some people use school as a comfort. I met a few college classmates who went to grad school specifically because they were scared of the real world and they wanted that comfort of spending another 4 years in school. Not because they thought the degree was worth anything, which was kind of sad, but that's how they live their lives. And I think it's very ineffective, and in the long run, you're losing out. You're letting others get ahead in the real world while you're just, delaying and not even growing as much. Sometimes you don't even learn much from grad school, or what you learn won't benefit you in the real world. Real world skills, soft skills aren't the same as, what's good in theory. So that's it. Hopefully that helped Ali, and I wish you the best of luck. When you're asking your questions, please be as specific as you can and go into detail about what you've already tried, because any type of broad thing like motivation or going to school, it's good, but it doesn't really dig down into what you've already tried, what techniques have failed for you, and your inner psychology, so I can help you more. So everyone is welcome to ask me questions, of course. To do so, you need to join my VIP email newsletter, where I share secrets of success from years and years of studying thousands of successful people that I share nowhere else. And you can find that on my website. There's a link to my newsletter you can join, and it's fantastic. It's incredible. But once you're part of my newsletter and you get any of my emails, you can reply to an email with your question, and I will make sure to read and respond to all of them. Finally, please subscribe to my podcast. Leave a review on Apple Podcasts. That will help my podcast get noticed. And thanks so much for listening. I'll see you guys later.
Thank you for listening to Will's Personal Development Podcast. You can find more at willyouLaugh.com.